What researchers discovered here is when you take a group of individuals, in this case a small pilot study, and you move with type 2 diabetes, and you move them from artificial light to daylight, the impact on the metabolism or other metabolic factors is so strong, it actually basically qualifies for that threshold in regard for proving a diabetic medication, which is 5%. In this case, a 7.6% better control over those metabolic markers, or 1.8 hours over a 24-hour period of time, which is quite powerful. In fact, let's look at it from a textual context. So here we go. So kind of like moving from your metaphorical cave back into the daylight per se, and actually kind of a lot of truth to that. So here we have it. A 7.6% blood sugar shift. Basically, a 24-hour day equates to nearly 1.8 extra hours of every single day. Read a little excerpt there. The FDA often considers just a 5% increase or 1.2 hours clinically significant enough to approve new diabetic medications. And here we have basically changing your office space from artificial light to daylight to yielding a better effect than that threshold for many medications, 7.6%. Now here's an interesting kicker for the other metabolic factors, or I should say markers. When they move the recipients from the artificial light to the daylight, they get better fat oxidation. So what the body does is it shifts its burning mode from carbohydrates to fats. Now the interesting part about that, if you look right here at the other block, is equivalent to 45 minutes of exercise or a 12-hour intermittent fast. That is something that needs to be explored in much greater depth later on. But in this small pilot study, that is astounding. Something so simple. We're not talking about doing anything as for changing diet or so on and so forth. We're just basically saying open the curtains and let light in. And this is the impact that it has. To give you a little bit more context, using the window per se. All right, it works fast. Now keep in mind, the study here was done over a 4.5 day period of time. It was a randomized crossover study. So here we have, so about 108 hours. She's looked at the particulars right there. It works, and I don't want to say metaphorical because it actually kind of works like it, at the speed of light. It works faster than a lot of oral medications because it actually is kind of working along that pathway. So if you read here the translation, you don't always need months to fix your metabolism. Just 4.5 days of natural sunlight change the bodies of diabetics faster than many medications would. To proceed forward, let's go into the study itself. All right, this is the public release. Exposure to natural light improves metabolic health. Let's go into the full study. No study to date has investigated the effect of indoor natural daylight exposure compared with a typical artificial light environment under controlled conditions on glucose homeostasis. Please forgive me if I speak kind of fast. Those familiar know we have a lot of territory to cover. And a 24-hour substrate metabolism in individuals with type 2 diabetes, T2D. Furthermore, the few human trials so far have mainly focused on specific metabolic outcomes. No study so far has investigated the effects of natural light exposure on human metabolism in an untargeted approach. Therefore, in the present randomized crossover trial, we, quoting, investigated the effects of 4.5 days of indoor exposure during office hours to natural light versus typical artificial office lighting in individuals with type 2 diabetes on circulatory markers of metabolism, all right, and on peripheral clot function in skeletal muscle, but also specifically on glucose control and 24-hour substrate metabolism. There's also a 16% boost in melatonin, not during the day, but at night, which is kind of an interesting, I should say, would you say a sub-outcome? But still, it's quite amazing. It's an observation. Let's go to the conclusion, and then we'll go into the details. In conclusion, through comparing real-world office lighting scenarios of natural daylight through window versus constant artificial lighting in individuals with type 2 diabetes, we found metabolic benefits associated with natural daylight exposure, specifically more time spent on normal glucose range, 1.8 hours, and a shift in whole body substrate metabolism toward higher fat oxidation levels. Pretty darn good to see the actual data on that in a second. Indicated improved glucose upon control of natural lighting. Our findings, quoting, provide a strong rationale for future research to focus more on the interaction of natural light exposure and metabolic health. The study also highlights, pun intended, the often unnoticed impact of the built environment in our health and raises further concerns about the prevalence of office environment poor and natural daylight sources. Just look at when we look at the full study at the end, just the topic sentence, it'll explain 80 to 90% now, at least in industrialized societies, is spent indoors. So literally, metaphorically, we are kind of in a cave. We emerged from the caves just to rebuild new caves. So you see what I mean in a second. All right, let's get into the details as follows. The physiological reality, our artificial baseline, your control, you see the 43.3% there, the natural 50.9%. This is interesting too. The fat oxidation, especially during the midday. Architects, teachers, instructors, anybody that has basically control or input in regard to designing offices and so on and so forth, this is real important because at 1 o'clock, that dive in blood sugars didn't occur, at least in this particular study, to the level that is normally seen. Translation: sunlight acts as a mild metabolic switch that helps the body process sugar better throughout the day, forces the body to burn more fat and energy right after lunch. So, how was the study conducted? There you have basically 3 days standardization, 4.5 days of working in sunlight. Sounds complicated. And then not working in sunlight, working in this type of light, artificial light. So basically, it was interesting because you're taking contrast of the exact same individuals in totally different circumstances and measuring the outcome. So it's not like you're taking 2 separate groups. You're taking that one group and it's the crossover. It's pretty amazing. All right, why does it work so fast? I'm just going to read the translation right there. Again, you see the cargo ship and the fiber optics. Diet takes weeks because they rely on slow chemical digestion. Makes sense. Light works in days because it's a direct electrical signal from the eyes to the brain's master clock. And the takeaways, I'm going to go to the melatonin bank right there because that was the most surprising part of the study to me personally. It goes, the biological clock, the daytime charge directly translates to a much larger release of natural melatonin at 9 p.m., preparing the day for the body for deep recovery later on. You don't think of sunlight in production of melatonin. Well, there you have it. All right, that is an incredible takeaway overall. Now for those with eye, we're going to go into the details which elucidate quite an amazing discovery in regard to this particular study itself. All right, 7.6% more time in the normal range. Right there, your study parameters. 13 participants, relatively small, but again, randomizer and crossover, which gave us a nice p-value, again, if I don't lose you, 0.036, which is pretty darn good. And again, I want to refer to this as a pilot study per se because the grouping was kind of small at 13. But however, though, the study itself, the protocol for the blueprint, about 150 to 3,600 lux. It's a wide span depending on the time of day. A randomized crossover, and it comes to the isolation per se. Now, this is kind of cool on its own, following the storyline. The primary care, continuous zero effort therapeutic. So think about it. You want to produce a productive office space. Yeah, you can try to intimidate your staff into working better, or you can make it more biologically conducive. Because if daylight is having this impact on the work environment, biologically, psychologically, you could say all the motivation you want. The easiest thing to do is open the drapes. All right, higher sustained productivity. And of course, it reduces the healthcare cost overall because nature's doing the job for you. All right, so translation, designing offices with natural light and investment in preventive medicine. It passively manages diabetes, boosts afternoon productivity, and lowers the long-term healthcare cost. That is amazing. Maybe even insurance companies could give some sort of credit for making a biologically conducive, healthy environment for people that have to work. All right, replication grant proposal. There it is. Not a very expensive thing to replicate. All right, and then this is kind of interesting too. The 16% increase in the evening melatonin. There's a specific number as far as the anatomy of the results. If you want to go into the details, the genes, the multiomics, and so on and so forth. Pretty amazing. And there you have the glossary of terms if you want to go back and familiarize yourself a little bit with it. And also, I wanted to show you the full study again. That topic sentence, 80 to 90%. So it's kind of like, if 80 to 90% of us are now avoiding natural light, it's kind of like our own little technological dark ages, although it may not appear that way because the illusion, but still just the same, we're probably spending less time in light. Actually, probably statistically it's a strong possibility, than we actually did in the Dark Ages, which is kind of something to say. But again, gratitude to the researchers for doing this wonderful research on simple natural light. Not a lot of profit involved in it, but however though, the results are quite profound. Again, larger studies in the future need to be conducted as well to explore this pilot study results, but still, just the same, that is quite awesome. Again, gratitude for watching. I am humbled you watch. And again, gratitude to the researchers as well. Almost forgot. And thank you so much. And I'll see what you and I both discover next week. All right, catch you all next time. See ya. Bye.